Some arguments are simple, short, and to the point, such as the argument Galen Strawson puts forward in his article, The Impossibility of Moral Responsibility. Indeed, in just a few short pages, Strawson offers a devastating critique of the notion of responsibility. The argument is so powerful, so succinct, and so hard not to at least tentatively accept. Strawson aptly terms it the basic argument. So then, let's get down to the basics. The basic argument, which purports to show the impossibility of responsibility, proceeds in 3 steps, so let's walk through each of these steps one at a time. The first step of the basic argument is to point out that we do what we do because of the way we are. Now I know this sounds a little confusing at first, but what Strawson is actually to say is something pretty obvious. Namely, he is trying to point out that we act as we do because of the sorts of people that we are, because of our various and unique personalities, preferences, and character traits. So, for example, when I'm at a barbecue and have to choose between steak and chicken, I will always choose steak. None of my friends or family would ever be surprised by this because I have a preference for steak, or we could say I have the character trait of being a steak-loving sort of guy. Similarly, if I was to give you $10 and tell you to go to see either a movie or go to the circus, you would choose based on your preferences. If you prefer movies, you'd go see the movie. If you prefer circuses, you'd go to the circus. Okay, so step 1 finished. We do what we do because of the way we are. Step 2 of the basic argument is the observation that in order to be responsible for something, we must have had some control in bringing it about. Again, this is a relatively straightforward, obvious, and easy to agree with observation. It seems obvious that we are only responsible for the things we have control over, for the things that we choose to do. To see that this is the case, think about the following situation. Suppose Johnny hits Jimmy at recess. We would say that he is responsible for the action because he had control in bringing it about. Johnny is responsible for hitting Jimmy, in other words, because he chose to do so. Now, however, further suppose that Johnny hit Jimmy because of an uncontrollable arm spasm. We would now likely say that Johnny is not responsible for his action. Indeed, since he had no control over it, he did not choose to hit Jimmy. Okay, so step 2 complete. Not only is it the case that we do what we do because of the way we are, it is also the case that in order to be responsible for something, we must have had some control in bringing it about. Step 3 of the basic argument is the observation that we have no control over the way we are. Now, this is the least obvious of the steps in Strawson's argument, but he is able to offer rather compelling reasons for why we should accept it. Namely, Strawson points out that the way we are, that is, our personalities, preferences, and character traits, are largely, if not exclusively, the result of nature and nurture. In other words, we have the personalities, preferences, and character traits that we do because of our genetic makeup and the way that we were raised. The facts that I am a steak sort of guy and that I have a preference for movies rather than circuses are thus due, according to Strawson, to my genetic makeup and to the way that I was raised. Now, I am sure that some of you are hesitant to go along with Strawson at this point. Indeed, we, especially Americans, like to think of ourselves as unique and original in our personalities and character traits. We like to think of ourselves, in other words, as completely self-made individuals, as completely in control of who we are. But I would challenge you to imagine that you were born to completely different parents, in a completely different country, at a completely different time, raised speaking a different language and practicing a different religion. Would you really have any of the personality, preferences, or character traits that you do now? Perhaps, but it seems, at least to me, rather unlikely. It seems, in other words, that, as Strawson claims, who we are is largely dependent on our nature and our nurture. However, it is also clear that we have absolutely no control over either. Indeed, we do not personally control either our genetic makeup or the way that we were raised. Therefore, it seems that we must conclude, since who we are is largely dependent on nature and nurture, and since we have no control over nature or nurture, we do not have control over the way that we are. With this, Strawson has put forward every step of his basic argument. He has observed and argued that, first, we do what we do because of the way we are. That second, in order to be responsible for something, we must have had some control in bringing it about. And that third, we have no control over the way we are. So let's put these steps together. When we do this, it becomes readily apparent that if every step in Strawson's basic argument is correct, then we must conclude that we are not responsible for what we do. Or, to put it differently, if the basic argument is correct, there is no such thing as individual responsibility. Now at this point, you might be wondering what all this has to do with ethics. Well, I think it has a lot to do with ethics. Indeed, insofar as we are ethical beings and capable of choosing between right and wrong, we can be held responsible for our decisions and rewarded or punished accordingly. But if there is no such thing as responsibility, then we clearly cannot be held individually responsible for the good and bad things that we do. And if we cannot be held responsible for the good and bad things that we do, then we cannot be rewarded or punished accordingly. So then, the major ethical implication of Strawson's argument turns out to be that it is unjust for us to reward or punish other people for their actions, as they are ultimately not responsible for them. Indeed, according to Strawson, the right and wrong things we do are not ultimately our fault. It would thus be unfair to reward or punish people for doing either. Clearly, then, Strawson's basic argument poses a deep challenge to the way in which we think about and apply ethics to ourselves and those around us. Now, if you are not impressed with the conclusions or implications of the basic argument, I hope that you are at least impressed with its brevity. Indeed, very few arguments do as much as Strawson's in so little space and time. This noted, while brevity may indeed be a mark of philosophical elegance, it is not necessarily a mark of philosophical accuracy. In other words, we should not be misled into thinking that just because Strawson's argument is simple, short, and to the point, that it successfully captures something true about the world. John Hospers, if you remember, observed that the world is a complex place. There is therefore no reason that we should expect philosophy dealing with the world, dealing with ethics, responsibility, or anything else for that matter, to be simple.